You're live.
Hello, Chicago from Madison, Wisconsin. Welcome to a reading tonight by myself. I'm Amy Quan Barry, and my good comrade in arms, fellow criminal, et cetera, Lysley Tenorio. I'm coming at you from Madison, Wisconsin. And Lysley, where are you at?
I am in San Francisco, and apologies in advance if my connection is really, really bad.
Yes, we have told Lysley that if he freezes, he has to freeze in an action shot. So that's the plan for this evening. Yeah. First and foremost, we wanted to extend a hearty thank you to Barbara's, which is the oldest independent bookstore in Chicago. So thank you, Barbara's Bookshop. We're so lucky to be here. To be inside, to be warm and safe, and all that kind of fun stuff. So we're really interested in sharing our work with you and getting a conversation going and all that kind of fun stuff. So what's on our docket for tonight is we're each going to read very briefly from our individual books and then have a little conversation among ourselves about writing, life, maybe the pandemic, maybe whatever it is that we're drinking, and then we'll open it up to your questions, which we always are excited to talk about. So if you haven't noticed already, Lysley and I are old friends, and we could talk about that. We've known each other since the last millennium. So we're really hoping that this is sort of just like an informal sort of get together. So there is that. I will introduce Lysley when he reads, and I told Lysley he didn't have to introduce me, but I'm gonna pull that back. So do you just want to say like who I am and where I am and what I do, or do you not want to do that? I can do it for myself.
Yes, I will introduce Amy. This is Amy Quan Barry. She is a literary triple threat. She is an accomplished poet, novelist, and playwright. And actually, you also wrote a libretto, so I guess that's a quadruple threat. You're the author of many, many books. Loose Strife is your most recent book of poetry. We Ride Upon Sticks is the new novel. And you're a professor at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. I'm trying to think of a fun fact about Amy. Oh,
my favorite condiment.
What's your favorite condiment?
Oh, you know, I dip everything in it.
Oh, ranch dressing, right?
Of course.
You also burned down your apartment in graduate school.
I told the police something different, and I'm not sure the statute of limitations is up on that yet. So it's stay on the AfriNet. You know,
yeah. I mean, it was an accident. It burned down, is what I meant. And you're going to be reading from your novel.
I am. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. You didn't realize you'd be put on the spot, that it would be like, you know, like Jeopardy, like, what is Quan Barry? Yeah. So it's a memory test. But so as Lysley mentioned, I'm going to be reading from my second novel tonight, which is called, I have to look, I couldn't remember. I'm like, oh yeah, it's called We Ride Upon Sticks. And basically this book takes place on the North Shore of Boston, where I was raised, in a town called Danvers. And this is all historical fact. Danvers, back in 1692, Salem was much bigger than what it currently is. And part of Salem was actually a little place called Salem Village. And Salem Village is where the Salem witch trials, the events that sparked the witch trials, began in Salem Village. And then about 60 years later, after the witch trials, that little area, Salem Village, broke off and became the town of Danvers, which still exists today. And that's where I was raised. And so in this book, we basically follow the 1989 Danvers women's varsity field hockey team as they attempt to make it to the state championship. So there are 11 players on a field hockey team. And so I'm going to read a little section here that tells you a little bit about who they are and what they're up to. Because they're kind of a bad news situation, Bad News Bears. If you remember, the Bad News Bears were a bunch of ragtag misfits who just never seemed to get it together. The Danvers High varsity women's field hockey team is similar. They're a rags to riches story. They begin the season, nothing is going right for them, until one of the people on the team decides, hey, maybe we should start dabbling in the darker arts, a little bit of witchcraft, and that might help our game. And so they've been doing that, and they've been winning games, and things have been going well for them. But the part that I'm going to read right now, they just had an outing, and they didn't do as well as they had been expecting to, considering that they're using witchcraft. And so they're having a team meeting in their locker room after this outing, and they're arguing about what they should do in order to try and get the witchcraft to help them again. So suddenly, Julie Kaling stood up on the locker room's only bench. She didn't say a word, just held something up high in the air for one and all to see. waving the object around as if the thing was the answer to all of our problems. Eventually, we quieted down and looked. It was an egg. We looked closer. It had a small face drawn on it in magic marker. 2 blue eyes with long lashes, a pert little pink mouth, some yellow curlicues for hair. "What is that?" said Jen Fiorenza. "Priscilla," said Julie. "It's her baby," Heather explained. "What?" "Health class," Heather said. "We each got an egg we're supposed to take care of for a week. It's supposed to show us how hard it is to be a parent." "It just makes me hungry," said little Smitty. "How is Priscilla supposed to help us get to States?" said Abby Putnam. Julie was now cradling the egg in her palm, patting it soothingly on the head. "I'm willing to sacrifice her," she said in a small voice. We all stood around dumbfounded. Finally, a spark caught. "Ah, you're saying we should egg someone," said Mel Boucher. "Not a bad idea." Julie made a face. "No. 300 years ago, the Salem witch trial started when a bunch of girls cracked an egg in a bowl of water to try and see the future. They wanted to find out who their husbands would be." Gently, she kissed Priscilla on the top of her eggy head. "I'm saying we should crack Priscilla open and have her tell us what to do." We all stood around internally deliberating it. To prognosticate by egg or not to prognosticate by egg? That was the question. "Anyone got a better idea?" Heather asked. "Yeah, we throw Priscilla at the door to the teacher's lounge," said boy Corey. "So what?" said girl Corey. "They wash it off. Big whoop." "What's an egg and some water going to tell us?" said Jen Fiorenza. "Who knows?" said Sue Yoon. "If it doesn't work, no harm, no foul." "No, not really. Julie gets a 0 on the assignment," said Heather. "I'll bring her a new egg," said little Smitty. "Mrs. Tilson signed the bottom of each one," said Heather. Julie tipped Priscilla over. There it was, Mrs. Tilson's handwriting, scrawled on the shell like a barcode. "Julie, you up for this?" said Abby Putnam. Julie nodded. With her free hand, she undid her braid, letting her long black hair fall down her back like a superhero's cape, or maybe a villain's. The best we could do was a clear plastic sandwich bag filled with carrot sticks. Heather Houston never ate the healthy lunch her mom packed for her, instead each day buying 2 bags of sour cream and onion chips and a Suzy Q from the school store and tossing the healthy lunch on her way home. We threw the carrots in the trash and filled the bag with water. Julie Kaling did the honors. It was hard without a bowl. She cracked Priscilla on the edge of the bench and did her best to hold back the yolk. We watched as the white slid down into the bag, the thing like a big slimy booger. "It's kind of like a human sacrifice," whispered Sue Yoon. "Cool," said little Smitty. We watched as the egg white took on new form in the water. "We're supposed to look at it by candlelight," said Heather. Julie Kaling had been lighting votives at the beginning of each day in her locker. She pulled one out of her bag. We turned off the lights and lit it. Then we looked long and hard. We looked harder than we'd ever looked at anything. Maybe it was all in the eye of the beholder. Yeah, it probably was. We all saw the gist of the same shape, but that's where the similarities ended. This is what we saw. Julie Fiorenza, a nail. Girl Corey, a car key. Boy Corey, a stamen and pistil. Sue Yoon, a TV antenna. Becca Bajelica, an erect penis. Mel Boucher, a fang. Little Smitty, a rabbit's foot. Heather Houston, a candy bar. Julie Kaling, a thumb. A.J. Johnson, a pen. Poor Abby Putnam didn't see anything at all. In the darkness, she couldn't tell the difference between the egg white and the water. She worried that maybe now she wasn't getting enough beta-carotene. "Well, that was a whole lot of nothing," said Jen Fiorenza. She poured the bag with the dregs of Priscilla down a drain in the middle of the floor. Wah, wah. So, one last thing I'm going to read, and then I will turn things over to Lysley. So, as Lysley mentioned, I am a threat. I'm not sure about how many, like, if it's, whatever, but yeah, I am definitely a threat in all the bad ways. But so I'm also a poet. So I'm actually going to read a poem from my second collection called Controversials. And the reason why I'm going to read this poem is because it's about Salem Village, Danvers, the place where I grew up and all that kind of fun stuff. So this poem is actually titled "The Excavated Foundations of the Salem Village Parsonage as Recipients," So I'll just unpack that title a little bit. So if you come to the town of Danvers, there aren't too many buildings that still exist that you could actually tie directly back to the time of the Salem witch trials, but there are excavated ruins that you can see. And so one of them is actually, it's a hole. It's this big hole where they've excavated the site where the original Salem village meeting house used to stand. And that meeting house is where the minister, the Reverend Samuel Parris, lived with his family. And it's also where he lived with the woman he enslaved, Tituba, who he bought in Barbados. And so again, you could go there and you could actually see this site in the ground. And so that's what part of the title refers to. And then the word recipiscence is a word that I stumbled on a couple of years ago. And recipiscence simply means hindsight or wisdom after the fact. And I just found that as a word just to be really beautiful. And so I use that as part of the title. So as you'll hear, though, this is a very lyric poem. It's not necessarily telling a story. It's more creating an atmosphere, creating a tone. But it's one to give you a little bit of background as far as what the title means and where it comes from. So the excavated foundations of the Salem village parsonage as recipiscence, like a mouth set in the frozen ground, and how our childhoods were informed by it, this innate sense of something missing. Even now, I imagine the girls were both pale and dark, like a flock of moons reflected in water, something seismic, languishing. What I would have done, they did. The night clear as broth, the fire pure volition. Who isn't desperate to see into the mechanism any way they can? I would have seen a house burning. I would have seen a man coming to me over water. I would have seen this place, its hold on me, the primacy of the deep image and the supplanting of narration. Where do we learn the art of explication? What can our origins teach us about who we should be? Then was the winter of small yellow birds, of visions. What this place suspended in the world beneath the world denotes, truth, and its transmitting. So that's it as far as my reading goes. And so now it's my chance to introduce my friend and co-defendant, Lysley Tenorio. So let's see. Oh, yeah, this is tougher than I thought. So Lysley Tenorio and I met back in 1999 when he was, I think you, at that time, you were the what was the name of your fellowship at Wisconsin?
I was the James McCreight.
So in 1999, he was the James McCreight Fiction Fellow here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He went on to receive fellowships from Stanford University, from Exeter. You were a fellow at Exeter. You were a fellow at the American Academy in Rome. You've been fellows at Yaddo, at McDowell, at the I don't know how to pronounce it,
Miasco Foundation.
In Italy. So he has had fellowships basically everywhere, received an NEA in fiction probably a little bit more than 10 years ago, and is the author of 2 works. So his short story collection, Monstrous, came out some years ago, and a couple of the stories in that collection have been adapted for the stage. So the short story Monstrous, and also the short story, what's the second short story that was?
Save the Eye Hotel.
And one of your stories now is currently also in the process of being adapted for the stage. And again, that one is
It was. One was a musical, Felix Starro, off-Broadway musical. This little theater right next to the Harry Potter, next to the big Harry Potter show.
Well, I'm sure that any day now, all of those, again, stage adaptations are going to be recast and redone. So it's just a matter of time. And then most recently, last year in 2020, he published The Son of Good Fortune, which came out, and from which he'll be reading tonight. Currently, Lysley is a professor of English at St. Mary's in California, and he is here to, and I feel very lucky that he's here to share his work with us. So, Lysley.
All right. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, everybody. Just a quick reminder, Amy read from her awesome novel, which is available for purchase. I think if we scroll down, I think there are some buttons that you can press, and that will lead you to Amy's book and to my book as well. So please support Barbara's. It's really wonderful of them to have us. So thanks for hosting. Thank you, Amy, for asking me to be part of this. I'm just going to read the prologue of the novel. I just think it's easy. It's not too long, and it doesn't need any explanation. So this is the prologue for The Son of Good Fortune. And again, hopefully you can hear me, and apologies for any bad connections. All right. This is the prologue. Maxima in the dark, half lit by a Virgin Mary nightlight and the glow of a screensaver, a slow motion sweep of stars and planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Earth. Dressed in denim cutoffs and a Mickey Mouse t-shirt, she doesn't shiver despite her wide open window and the cold night beyond. She sits at the foot of her bed, cleaning her nails with the tip of a switchblade. May bakas ka bang nakikita sa aking mukha? She sings. Like all her favorite Filipino love songs, this one is about heartbreak. An alarm goes off. The digital clock glows red, 10:10 p.m. She closes the switchblade. Maxima stands and stretches, takes quick jabs at the air. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and flips on the desk lamp and sits, turns on the ball-shaped webcam atop her monitor. A tap to the space bar and the galaxy vanishes. Now her face fills the screen. Using it as a mirror, she puts on a maroon lipstick and dabs with a Kleenex, smiles wide to check her teeth. She undoes her ponytail and shakes out her hair, a long black wave, then turns her face from side to side, searching for her best angle. She could easily pass for 30, but is somewhere in her 50s. Her true age, she swears, is a mystery, even to herself. Eyes closed and fingertips on the keyboard, she whispers to herself so softly that a person standing next to her would have no hope of knowing what she says. She takes a deep breath, opens her eyes, types and clicks until another browser window opens. There's a man on the screen. My love, he says. No, she says, in Tagalog. Sorry, he says. Hello, mahal. That's better. She blows him a kiss. Oh, Mahal, please don't tease me, he says. It's been a lousy few days. Ano ba? What happened, Henry, she says. Oh, where to start? He removes his glasses, the stubbly flab of his cheeks moving up and down as he rubs his temples. He pours a shot of Jack Daniels into a coffee mug and recounts his terrible week. More layoffs at the plant, and all the guys blame him. His ex-wife trashed the Miami timeshare but won't pay for repairs. And just today, an invitation to his high school reunion. My freaking 40th, he says, arrived in the mail. But the real downer, he says, is the weather. End of spring, and I'm still shoveling snow. Snow, snow, snowy, snowy snow, Maxima sings in a made-up tune. My whole life, she says, I have never seen snow. Come to America, he says, to North Dakota. One day, she says, if God is good. God is always good, he says. Come closer. I want your face to fill my screen. Maxima leans into the webcam so close that she could kiss it. He says that she is the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. These past 3 weeks of talking online, he says, are the best he's had in years. A twice-divorced balding white guy on the edge of 60 doesn't hope for much. But when he found her profile on goodcatholicfilipinas.com and saw that her favorite Filipino food was sweet and sour chicken, that her favorite singer was Shania Twain, and that her lifelong dream was to live in joy with a good man in God's country, he convinced himself to send her a message. It's silly to reminisce, he says. The life before you seems so long ago. I didn't realize how lonely I was. I was lonely too, she says. And I think that maybe, well, probably I might be falling in love with you. Maxima pulls away from the screen. I'm sorry, he says. Too much, too soon? Not too soon, Mahal, she says. I think maybe I'm falling in love too. With me, Henry says. Yes, with you, tanga. Tanga? It means stupid, she says. He lets out a breath, slaps his chest twice. My heart, it's racing. Heart, she says. In Tagalog, puso. Puso, he writes the word down. That means heart, got it. Soon you speak Tagalog, then you visit me in the Philippines, diba? Or you visit me first, he says. Maybe you can be my date to the reunion. He sets the scene. He enters his high school gym to the tune of his old prom song, We've Only Just Begun by the Carpenters. And though he hasn't aged as well as his classmates, there's no question that he has the sexiest, most gorgeous woman in the room on his arm. The other women are jealous of her, the men envious of him, and the bullies from his freshman year just stand side to side, giving him the thumbs up. And the whole night, he says, you and I just dance. He leans into his webcam. His whole head seems to inflate on Maxima's screen. When can we meet, he says. Philippines to America, she says. Not so easy trip. The lines in Manila for passports and visas take hours, she says, sometimes days, and never mind the near zero chance of government approval. Their best hope for being together is to pray, to keep faith in God, and to wait. And when I come to North Dakota, she says, will you show me the snow? Count on it, he says. Okay, but one condition only. I don't shovel. He laughs, which makes her laugh harder and harder until she's hunched over, laughter becoming gasps for air. Mahal, he says, are you okay? She shakes her head, takes a breath and says it's nothing, then keels over again. It's definitely not nothing, he says. What's wrong? She looks straight at the camera. I'm hurt. Hurt? Hurt where? She clears her throat, takes a breath. Don't worry, Henry, it's nothing, okay? Stop saying that, just tell me. She looks at him for a moment, as though wondering if he can be trusted with something as private as pain. If that's what you want, Mahal, she stands up. Then okay. She lifts her shirt slowly, adjusting the camera to make sure he sees, then turns in a slow circle to reveal a wound, a crusty gash that spans from the top of her hip to the middle of her abdomen. She explains, it happened in the typhoon 2 months before. A snap of bamboo, sharp as a spear, sliced across her body in the high-velocity winds. I lost so much blood, she says, but I'm thinking, okay lang, it's just a cut, bahala na, pero now I have an infection. Her own grandmother, she tells him, died from an infected cut, but God's good grace will keep her alive, she's sure of it. She lowers her shirt and sits, but every day, she says, it hurts. What can I do, Henry says, how can I help? Oh, I hate this, I hate being so far away from you. Before Maxima can speak, Henry says that maybe the day to meet should come sooner than later. What if this is God and the universe telling them that he should be the one to fly to her, and depending on the current round-trip airfare from Grand Forks to Manila, now is the time to come together? But Maxima says no and promises him that there's a better day ahead for them to meet, one when she's healthy and strong. For now, all she needs are his love, faith, and prayers, nothing else. But there is one thing, she says. Tell me, Henry says. Medicine. Ointments and creams with all the antibiotics. The best hospital in Manila has them, pero she bites her lip, fighting tears. Walang pera. Walang pera, Henry says. No money, she says. There's never money. Well, how much do you need? Bahala na mahal, it's okay, please don't worry. How much, he says, tell me. No, I can't accept, I'm too ashamed. Just tell me, he says, please. She takes a deep breath and nods. 22,000 pesos. Pesos, how much is that? $400, she says, USD. Henry says nothing, just listens. Half the money's for the doctor, she says. The other half is for the medicine. In the Philippines, if you have no insurance, medical care is very expensive. It's impossible talaga. It's not like in the States. She dabs her eyes with her pinky, and with her other hand safely out of camera view, she reaches for the switchblade next to her computer. She flicks it open and twirls it between her fingers, a thing she does when she's anxious or uncertain, or when the inevitable is on the edge of finally happening. On screen, Henry is motionless, his face a blank. Mahal, she says, are you there? Finally, he moves. I'm here, he says. Sorry, the screen froze for a sec. Where were we? What were you saying? Money, she says, for the medicine. And how much was it? 500? 500, she said. Yes, 500 USD. He looks toward the ceiling and blinks like he's adding up figures in his head. Let's make it 600, okay? 6? She shakes her head, says, no, starts to weep. It's too much, Mahal, too much. Shh, he says, a finger to his lips. There's no price on love, diba? She laughs. Diba, yes, that's right. She wipes her eyes with a Kleenex, says it's almost 1 p.m. in the Philippines and time for her to go. She gives quick instructions when and how he can wire money to an online account, tells him she'll let him know, she'll let him know when the payment goes through. This will help me so much, so much. Thank you, Mahal, thank you, she says. And soon, one day, I promise we will meet. Henry nods. Yes, Mahal. And when we do, we'll sit in the countryside, put on some Shania, and then he leans into his camera, filling her screen again. We're gonna fuck like bunnies. He winks and kisses the air, and the blade spins faster in Maxima's hand. They say goodbye, and Henry signs off, disappears from the screen. But Maxima is still there, and for a moment she watches herself, tilts her head slightly, like her face is one she recognizes but doesn't quite know. She turns off the webcam. She lifts her shirt, carefully peels away the wound, a trick of rubber and glue, then jots down quick notes in a small spiral notebook. She picks up the switchblade and opens her closet, where, on the inside of the door, she's tacked up a human target, the kind found at a shooting range. She steps back, stands against the opposite wall. Maxima raises the blade, aims, and throws. She misses the heart, not by much. Thank you.
Very good. Very good.
Questions? Amy, should I go first? I have questions for you.
Well, I think I'll ask you a question first, just because, again, you just read. So my very first question to you, though, and again, we do have some questions also from the audience that I can see that we can get to. But my first question would just be, like, when you write a character who is so flawed, how do you still make them sympathetic at the same time? Because, I mean, you start off right away like, she is flawed, right? And we see it. And so how do you keep the reader going instead of being like, this is a terrible person, I'm not going to keep reading? So thoughts on deeply flawed characters.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a challenge because she does these morally questionable things. I think you make a flawed character by building a world that might help explain why they have these particular flaws. Maxima is a Filipino woman in her 50s, and she's undocumented. And she's living in Northern California. She has a 19-year-old son who's really the protagonist of the novel. His name is Excel. Again, they're both undocumented. And they are just doing what they can to get by. As an undocumented person, her options are so limited. She's trying to do her best in a country that in many ways doesn't want her, especially, given the recent political climate. So I think by showing her just trying to do her best, trying to do good by her son, giving a sense of her backstory. She is a former B-action Filipino movie star of B movies, an action star of really cheesy B movies. And she really had these dreams of becoming a movie star in the Philippines. And I think that's kind of a relatable thing, this idea of having these big aspirations. And clearly they fall short. And she finds herself unmarried and pregnant, very difficult situation anywhere, but particularly difficult in a country like the Philippines. So she goes to the States to try to find a better life. I think circumstances like that, I mean, they're certainly more nuanced than I'm saying them in the book, hopefully make her still a sympathetic character while also still, being terribly, terribly flawed.
Cool.
All right. So I'll ask a question now. Okay. Here's my first question. I think one of my favorite things about, writer Quan Barry is that you read one book and you don't necessarily, you can't really predict what kind of book will come next. Like if you read your first book, Asylum, that wouldn't prepare me for like Loose Strife. You read She Weeps Each Time You're Born. There's no way as a reader, I would predict that you would come out with a book like We Ride Upon Sticks about, a field hockey team dabbling in the occult. How do you decide what the next project is? Because the subject matters of your books, all your books, are so different from each other.
Yeah, they are, aren't they? So my next book, which is hopefully due out next spring, I'm hopefully going to be in spring catalog. It's a book that follows Buddhist monks in Mongolia as they go looking for a reincarnation. So yeah, how do you go from like the 80s and the claw, right, to like this crazy book about Buddhist monks in Mongolia? And then I have to say, I have an idea for my next book. I actually want to write a horror book. It's not gonna be blood and knives. I'm not into that, but it's like psychological horror of people trapped in Antarctica. So that's gonna be like my next book. So yeah. So how do I come up with them? I think it's because like I don't get bored, but I just don't want to do the same thing again, So for example, I have to admit, and I understand that so many people are struggling right now with the pandemic, and I get that, I've seen it. But for me, the pandemic it's perfect for writers. Right? It's like, especially here in Wisconsin where we have like 2 feet of snow. I got nowhere to go. I got nothing to do. Right? So it's part of the reason why I've gotten into writing plays. And then I have to admit, I'm going to start putting this out into the universe so that hopefully something will happen. I just finished writing a full-length feature film script, which nobody asked me for, and I'm sure I'm never going to sell it. But I wrote it because it's a comedy. I saw a movie with Viola Davis, and I'm like, somebody needs to write Viola Davis a comedy, like something about Mary. So it's like this gross out comedy, but it's specifically written for Viola Davis, right? So like, where does that stuff I guess it just comes from like seeing a hole. Like I just saw this hole that because like Viola Davis always plays like the put upon, she's amazing, but you know what I mean? It's super heavy things. And I just identified a hole, like somebody needs to write her a comedy, right? And I think that my novels and my books, I think even the reason why I'm a writer, I've always identified this hole, like when you and I were coming up in the 90s, as undergrads, it's true that, now thankfully there's so many folks of color who are publishing and it's great. But back in the 90s, like I had my professor, Rita Dove, who was a poet, but I couldn't have named that. I mean, and Toni Morrison, right? But I couldn't have named like a lot of writers of color. So I just saw this hole, and I'm like, hey, people like me should be writing stories and writing poems, and so I think that's how I kind of come up with all these disparate things. Is I just see like these holes. So even my first novel about Vietnam, it's the idea that so many books about Vietnam are about the Vietnamese War, the American War, and about American soldiers there. And I'm like, no, I want to know about Vietnam from the Vietnamese perspective and what that looked like. So again, it was just this idea of identification of a whole. And then the last thing I'll say is in thinking about this novel that came out, the comedic, We Write Upon Sticks book. It's like I've always identified this hole when it comes to sports books. There's not that many sports books, team sports books about women, about girls. Team sports books are always like Friday Night Lights, that kind of thing. So I was like, what does a team sports book look like, but from the perspective of like teen girls? So at the end of the day, like I said, it's just, for me, it's about what's that hole. And I'm not trying to be trendy. I'm not trying to be on point. I guess like right now, actually, the 80s and witches are hot. But when I started writing that book, I was not thinking like, what's the trend? I was just interested in what that hole is.
Right.
So there's that. But yeah. So a question for you, and then we can look at the questions. I say there's 2 questions in the thing, but question for you has to do with, I don't think I'm giving anything away because it happens pretty early in your book. And it's the idea that the main character heads to this place called Hello City. And I was curious, like, research, like does this place exist in some ways? Is it based on a place? Did you have to research it? Like, have you been to a place like Hello City? So if you could maybe talk a little bit about what Hello City is, and then how you sort of came up with that as a place.
Sure. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, Excel is Maxima's son. He's 19 years old. He realizes his options are quite limited. He works under the table at a pizza place called The Pie Who Loved Me, where he is kind of treated abusively by a horrible boss. So he decides to split with his girlfriend to go live in an off-the-grid city where he thinks he can kind of reinvent himself. So I looked up off-the-grid cities. And there's one in Southern California called Slab City, which is basically just this area in the desert that at one point was meant to be a kind of military training base. So the only remnants of that base are these slabs, these concrete slabs that are there. So people started moving there, setting up camp or making their houses on these slabs. And it was just like, do unto others. That was really the only rule of being there. Otherwise, they were kind of their own community. I decided to base Hello City on Slab City, but I decided to change the slabs to helipads. I just imagined, what if it were like this helicopter military training ground that was abandoned, and all that was left behind were these helipads with these giant H's painted in the middle. And so I just imagined this landscape dotted with a bunch of H's, and this idea of what H could mean. H, for them, it means hello, but also at one point, Excel wonders, what else might H stand for? Helicopter, help, hello, here, home. So this idea of the H and its possible meaning, I don't know, just kind of resonated in ways I didn't expect. But it definitely was inspired by an actual place. If you go on YouTube and you type in Slab City, it's quite a community. Everyone should check it out. It's pretty trippy. I haven't been there myself, but maybe one of these days I'll take a road trip.
And I like that idea of a game where you have the H, and it's the question of what else the H can stand for, because that's definitely a game that I play with my family. So we do it about P.F. Chang's. We're like, what does PF stand for? We're like, Frampton, Pretty Free, whatever. So we do it for all kinds of JD Byrider. What does the JD stand for? So anyway, good. So one of the questions that we've got asks us both, like, how did we get into writing? Like, how did we begin, right? So I'll just say a little bit more about me, how I sort of got into this whole thing. And again, as I mentioned, that idea of like identifying holes. So that's definitely one way that I got into writing. And then it's true, when I was a kid, I'm not a gadget person. I'm not into technology. And yet as a kid, I loved like typewriter. It just, when you're a little kid, you feel like you have a lot of agency because you have this machine and you're like, blah, 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 blah. And then I remember when we got like a Texas Instruments computer, and then we were definitely early adapters to Apple stuff. So we had like a Mac. And so I still remember, as like a 10-year-old, like I was probably the first kid to put, like, if I had to pass in like a book report, it would all be typed, but there would be a paper where you could, because I just wrote it on my computer, you know what I mean? And so it was just like, here's like a 6-year, this 10-year-old who's like, here's my book report. It's all just like typed up.
What was it? You remember the book?
Well, I remember, I still have it. It's that we had to do this thing when you had to interview you could pick anybody who worked for town government in the town of Danvers. So you had to pick somebody who had a government job, and you had to interview them, right? And so kind of as a joke, I decided to interview the guy who was like the manager of fences. Like that was he had a real title, which I can't remember what it's called. But he's somebody about fences. And so I had to go and interview him and all stuff. But it turned out it was like, he's probably the most powerful guy in Danvers because he decided like where your fence could be, you know what I mean? And how tall. And I was like, this guy's got a lot of power, So I definitely remember my report on the town fence dude. But, so I would always just write stuff. And I would say too, that as a kid, like I never made distinctions between poetry and fiction and plays and not, I just wrote stuff because it was what I was into. And I really dropped off though, probably after elementary school. So it was just something I did for fun. I never thought I'm going to grow up and be a writer. It was just like, I got stuff here I can type on, woohoo. And that's also the reason why my typing skills, unlike Lysley's, I still type like this. Because as a kid, people thought I was super speedy because I was super speedy for like a 10-year-old. But the thing is, I still type the exact same way I did when I was 10, which is terrible. But I kind of got started that way. And then, when after junior high, I just stopped and I did what other people do. I played field hockey or whatever. But then when I was in college, where I went to school, there were some really great poets: Rita Dove, Charles Wright, Greg Orr. And so it was kind of like a thing, to take creative writing classes. And that's where I got more serious about it. But Lysley, what about you? What was your journey into Lesliedom?
Kind of the same route. I mean, I actually didn't do really any writing growing up. I mean, I certainly read, but the idea of becoming a writer never even occurred to me. But then in college, I took a history of the short story class with a writer named Bharati Mukherjee. Sadly passed away a few years ago. I just took the class to fulfill a requirement. And I had never known an actual writer before, so I decided to read one of her books. I picked up her story collection called The Middleman and Other Stories, which is a collection of stories about contemporary immigrant America. And I remember it was the first time I ever saw a Filipino character in contemporary fiction. And that resonated with me. One, just the idea that she would sort of step outside her own immediate experience and imagine the lives of other people. I was actually really moved by that. And it, for the first time, it made me think that a piece of art really could matter, could really be important in a political way, in a real world way. And so I did my best to emulate that. I started taking creative writing classes, and my work was terrible. I remember a classmate called them immigrant tragedies of the week, where like a dark secret was revealed on page 9 of like a 12-page story. But it was also the only class I was losing sleep over because I really cared about it. So I wasn't any good, but I really, really cared about it, and I was willing to put in the work. And, after I graduated, I didn't really know what to do. So I decided to go to an MFA program and said, okay, these are the 2 years where you figure out yes or no, do you really care about writing? And if you care about writing, then you'll pursue it. And if not, you at least tried. And I realized I cared about it, and, just kind of floated around, went to Exeter, went to Wisconsin, anywhere where I could get funding just to get, these stories done. I am super duper duper slow. I may type faster than Amy, but I write much slower. I just, the pandemic sadly has not been too inspiring for me. But I'm hoping that'll change. But yeah, it's just, I feel like I just commit myself to a particular project. There's no I don't know. Sometimes it's like, why am I doing this? I don't know why I'm doing this. It's just, I think of something and I obsess over it. And once I'm done, I'm not sure what the next thing is. So I've got some rough ideas, still trying to figure that out.
So click on that. Again, I see that we have more questions coming in. So a question that we can both answer is just like, might be a quick answer is, how much of our stories are based on true events? People ask me because people know that I played field hockey in 1989. It's also true. I guess I had a picture of my team, but it's also true that we did make it to the state championship. kind of where the similarities end. So we didn't actually use the dark arts in order to get there. It was just, we did take steroids. No, I'm kidding. But no, we didn't actually dabble in the dark arts. And so as far as parts of my story that are true, actual happening wise, I would say, well, okay, this is interesting. All of the places in my book are true, like 99.9% of places, with the exception in the opening chapter of some things in New Hampshire. I was a little fuzzy. I know New Hampshire pretty well, but I was a little fuzzy about the campus of UNH, University of New Hampshire. So there are definitely details about the University of New Hampshire that I fudged. But everything else place-wise is 100% accurate to the time. I actually had a very dedicated copy editor who fact-checked the hell out of my book to the point where she would tell me things like, I would say on page, 57, somebody was making a prom dress out of a McCall's pattern 5374. And she would be like, there is no McCall's pattern 5374. Like, she was in it, you know? So all the places in Danvers, you can still see like Supreme's roast beef or Rocco's pizza, you know, the places like Endicott Park, the schools, Great Oak. I went to Great Oak. It still exists. All that stuff is 100% factual. The only thing that maybe if I were to say two more things that are based on truth is the coach, Coach Marjorie Butler is based historically on our actual coach, who was Barb Damon. And one of the reasons why I could base it on an actual person is because sadly Barb passed away 2 years ago. And so because she has passed away, it turns out that you can then write factual things based on someone who is now deceased. So the coach is very much based on a real person. And then the only other thing that I would say is based kind of in fact is the description of what happens in Salem on Halloween. After I graduated from college, I went back home. I lived at home for a year and I worked at Borders Books in Peabody, Massachusetts. And there were people on staff who were Wiccans. And I went with them one Halloween to Salem. And it's true that Salem now is very much like Times Square. Like, it's been Disneyfied. It's very family friendly. There's a lot of commerce going on there now, right? It's tourism. In the 90s, it was a little seedy. It was before Salem really found its footing as far as tourism. And so when we went there for Halloween one night, back then, like it was literally like what happens in the book. It was Wiccans. It was more of a memorial. They were marching to remember the things that happened to people who had been, accused of being witches. I remember there were people yelling at them, people with signs, like suffer not a witch to live, that kind of thing. So that part of the book is based on memories that I had. But again, Salem now, like I said, it's not like that. It's a really great place. So if people get a chance to go, I strongly recommend checking it out. So for you, Lysley, were there anything in your book that were?
Well, I'm curious now because, so you mentioned with your coach, the reason you were able to base the character on her was because she passed away. Was that a legal thing? Like, is it? Yeah. Oh, I thought you would.
Well, because books always say any resemblance to people living or dead is purely coincidental. But okay. I was told by my editor, because my editor actually told me she passed away. I didn't know. Because it had just happened in just like I have friends who I'm still in contact with who were still in contact with her, but I hadn't known. So anyway, but once it happened, then I went back into the manuscript and I pumped up the aspects that were definitely like, so people who know her would now read it and know, like, oh, the trucker's cap, oh, her knees, oh, so those hadn't been there and I just pumped that up. So yeah.
Okay, interesting. So I need to wait until you die until I can write about you.
And don't try and arrange that so that, you know what I mean? So that way you don't have to wait.
None of this is based on my life. I mean, I've been close to people who were undocumented, and that certainly, that had an impact for sure. So there are, like Amy's book, while Hello City is made up, the rest of the book takes place in a town called Colma, which is right outside San Francisco, where I live. And Colma is famous for being a small town of 17 cemeteries where the dead outnumber the living. If you live in San Francisco, you cannot be buried in San Francisco. So a lot of people who want to be buried and live in San Francisco, you go to Colma. So it's this very strange place where there are 17 cemeteries. Its main industries are car dealerships and cemeteries. And there's also a random casino in the town. It's also just along the edge of a freeway on either side of which is a target. So they're like two targets that face each other, and target features prominently in the book. So none of it is autobiographical. None of my work is autobiographical, but I always say, and this is probably true for most writers, to a certain extent, it's always emotionally autobiographical. If I can't really relate to what the characters are going through emotionally, if I can't make a connection that way, I don't think I can really invest in their stories. So I feel like I've felt some of the things these characters have felt, but that's probably the extent of it.
So cool.
Let's see what else is in the question. Amy, "We Write Upon Sticks" is so evocative of the 80s. I found myself laughing at the longo historical details that appear I'd completely forgotten about. Are you mining your memories when you write these details?
Unfortunately, you know, I have this little video that sometimes I've shown that kind of gives a history of the book and sort of where it came from. And it definitely, let's just say that this video does have certain photos of me with my hair styled in certain ways, and then I'm wearing certain crazy outfits whose colors completely clash and I would never be caught dead in today. So yes, I have to say that in many ways this was like the easiest book of I've ever written, because I didn't really have to do any research. It's like I remember. I'm one of those people who memory wise, I don't know, I just remember things. So it was not a stretch at all to remember. Interestingly, because of the pandemic, I actually have been in Zoom contact with folks who played field hockey, who I played field hockey with. And then I was fortunate, my book came out March 3rd, and the country didn't really shut down until around March 12th, March 13th. And so I actually was back in Massachusetts, and I got to go to my high school, and I got to give a reading. And it's true, like the day after I gave my reading, the governor of Massachusetts was like, "We're done," and so everything shut down the day after my reading. So I was like, "Shwoo," But at my reading, like, women came who I played field hockey with. There were these two much older women who came, who were our coaches, like JV coaches, and who were also referees, so I got to see all these folks. And they're always asking me, like, "How do you remember this stuff?" And I'm like, so for example, in the book, this is also true, that there's this one 80s song that they play before games to get pumped up. If you do nothing else tonight, at some point you need to Google the song "Look Out for Number One" by, I think his name's Johnny Farrager. It's a song from Staying Alive. So it's not from Saturday Night Fever. It's from Staying Alive. It is classic 80s. Oh my God, like the song. It's so great though. I don't know why people don't still remember it. I don't think we even knew it at the time, but it was just because our coach had it on cassette tape, and she would always make sure that she would give us the tape before a game, and we would pop it in our, I had like a boombox, and mine was the best. Well, I wouldn't say it was the best one, because it was actually small instead of the huge ones. It was like, I think it was like the brand was Sharp, and it wasn't as huge, so it was like cool that you could carry it around. It was much, and we would pop it in my cassette tape, and we would like jam out to Look Out for Number One. And my friends were like, "How did you remember that we, used that song?" And I was like, I've never forgotten it. Like, it's like it was yesterday. I was like, "Pop that tape in, woohoo!" And so
Uh-oh. Am I? Oh, no. Barbara, can you hear me? Can people hear me? I don't know if I'm frozen or if Amy's frozen. Can anyone hear me? Okay, so you can hear me. All right. We'll wait for Amy to get back. There she is.
I was talking to myself, so I was having a good time. So I don't know. But maybe it was probably
froze again. Or is it me? Technology. Oh, she got the action post right. She is making a fist. Okay, so I'll talk while Amy tries to rejoin. Let's see. Were there any other questions? Okay, I think we answered those. I I guess I'll just talk a little bit more about my book, I guess. Son of Good Fortune. There she is.
So I'm here.
Yes.
Because the thing is, I was here it was almost like I was a ghost. I felt like I was here the whole time. It looks the exact same, so I didn't realize that nobody could see me.
Right. It's confusing. So, because I thought I was the one who was frozen. So,
Amy. The computer's way of telling me that I shouldn't divulge any more secrets about where the book came from.
I was wondering, though, since we're on the topic of the 80s, what is your favorite 80s song? Like, what is your essential favorite 80s song, 80s TV show, and 80s fashion trend?
Wait, fried green tomatoes? Wait, no, I'm kidding. That Simpsons joke about what's your favorite novel, your favorite TV, and your favorite food? And the answer is fried green tomatoes, right? So, all right. So, favorite 80s song would have to be this song called I think it's called "Nothing Going On But the Rent" by a woman named Gwen Guthrie. So, if you do a search for it, it's Gwen Guthrie, and I think the song is called "Ain't Nothing Going On But the Rent." I love that song. I love the idea too that I was like a kid, because the song is basically about how she's a woman and she can't be with a guy who doesn't have a job, because like you got to have a job. So like the refrain is, "You've got to have a job if you want to be with me. No romance without finance." Right? I just love the idea that I was like a kid, and already as a kid I was like, no romance without finance. You know what I mean? So that would be my favorite song. My favorite TV show, we really weren't super allowed to watch it, and I was probably too young to really be able to 100% appreciate it. In my mind, though, it takes up a huge amount of space in my mind, and that is Square Pegs. I don't know if you remember Square Pegs.
Sure, yeah.
I think it was the first TV show with Sarah Jessica Parker.
Right, right.
Yeah. So again, I'm sure if I saw it today, it would be terrible. But as a kid, I was fascinated by Square Pegs. So that would be my.
It holds up. It's still funny.
Does it? Yeah. So I have Square Pegs. And then my favorite style, is that the question? The third one was my favorite style.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I was not stylish. My mother, who is very creative, it's true that my mother made a lot of our clothes. Like she physically sewed them, which meant that they were better quality, but they weren't necessarily very stylish. So there were definitely things though that I wanted, and when I would finally get them, I would be like, so for example, there were things that we used to call jazz shoes. Like I really wanted a pair of jazz shoes. They look like bowling shoes, but all one color, but we called them jazz shoes. And then for a while, they were like a certain kind of moccasin was really popular. You know what I mean? I really wanted them. And so, but yeah, I unfortunately was not styling. Although the idea like of a pair of parachute pants, I would have loved to have had parachute pants, but unfortunately it just never happened for me. So
get them now. You can get them now.
I guess I could. I get my butt into them after the pandemic since I'm up 10 pounds. But anyway, here's a great question for both of us. So Lysley, do you have a writing soundtrack? And if so,
a writing soundtrack? Yeah. I don't. I can't listen to music. I can't really listen to anything. I really need either silence or just the equivalent of white noise to write, sadly. What about you, Amy?
Yeah, it's not that I need silence, but I've got no. Sometimes people try and come up with a soundtrack after your books. You know what I mean? They'll ask you like, come up with a soundtrack for your book. So if you had to come up with a soundtrack now, like if there was like a CD in, you know what I mean, in your book, like what would you have on that CD?
So lately we've been doing, because this is the pandemic, we've been doing puzzles every night. And so we'll listen to random music like on YouTube or something. And I've found, so I grew up listening to a Filipino singer named Nora Honor, who did a lot of covers. And I found one of her albums on YouTube. And she covers like Engelbert Humperdinck, The Carpenters. And what I love is that you can hear her Filipino accent. It's funny because my partner Bruce, he can't really detect it, but I can, and it's just there's just so much nostalgia there, and I don't know, I love her. She has a really great voice, and there's definitely a cheese factor to what she's doing, and there's definitely a cheese factor to some of this book, so that feels appropriate. What about you? Do you have you have so much to choose from in terms of the soundtrack for this book.
I know. I was trying to figure it out with a friend of mine last year. I was actually down in Australia. She was actually my college roommate. And so one day together, we were like, what would the soundtrack be? You know, because the thing is, we were trying to pick songs that people don't think about all the time already when you think about the 80s. You know what I mean? That was actually a bit harder. And most of the songs that we came up with were still things that everybody thinks of, right? But it's true that I'm partial to Shaka Khan. I'm like, Shaka Khan, you know, you need Shaka Khan, right? So it's like you just got to have that on there. But yeah.
The Warrior by Scandal, was that on your list? Featuring Patti Smythe?
No.
That would be these characters. The Warrior?
Is she married to John McEnroe? I always get confused.
Yeah. Do you remember that song though, The Warrior?
Yeah, but it wouldn't be in my top 10.
But it would be good for this book, I think. Because they're kind of warriors in a way. Witches, but
I suppose. But yes. Yeah. So all right, we have about 5 minutes. Hopefully I won't freeze in those 5 minutes. So other kinds of questions. So Lysley, I had a question for you about your ending, again, without giving anything away, right? And so I was wondering if you could talk about like your decision to end the book. Again, I don't want no spoiler alerts, but to end it like where you do, where it's ended before something that's really major actually has happened, but we've been told that this thing is going to happen, right? And so I was curious, like, your decision to end it like that with just like the promise of this thing as opposed to actually showing us this thing.
Right. I think like a lot of writers, I like the open ending. And by open, I just mean that there's still a lingering sense of possibility, dramatic, emotional, psychological. And because I think these characters in so many ways live uncertain lives because they're undocumented, I think ending on a note of uncertainty, a lack of definitiveness in terms of event, it felt right. I think it just made sense. So that's how I came up with that ending. What about? Well, I don't want to give away anything about yours either, but there is a move. I'll just say a move that you do to sort of like maybe fulfill readers' curiosities about these characters' fates, if you know what I'm saying. Again, I won't reveal it, but how did you decide to do that?
Yeah, so it's true. As I was writing the book, I didn't know how it was going to end. And I'm somebody who, generally speaking, I don't plan things out. Like, I just like to write, then I stop, then I write, then I stop. But as I got closer to the end, I kind of knew, and this is terrible, and I feel like I got a bad review in the New York Times, and that the Times kind of alluded to this. And it was the idea that it's true, like the big game, like the state championship, in some ways, like I didn't really care about what happens in the state championship. So even though it's like it's a thing, it wasn't, it wasn't super important to me to just like show the big game. It was like everything else that was happening was much more important to me. And so because I decided that the big game wasn't like the climax of the book, it opened up the possibility of doing other things. And so again, by putting that off to the side, it allowed me to go in other directions and to explore different stuff. So on that note, I think it might be a good time for us to say goodbye.
All right.
So thank you to Barbara's Bookstore for hosting us tonight. Thank you to my good friend Lysley Tenorio for holding down the fort while I was off in whatever my action pose was.
Thank you. Your action pose was kind of like this, a fist, so it actually worked. So.
Although I probably had my eyes closed, I was probably like, Thank you all for tuning in. And if you see us on YouTube, thank you for that too. So, support your local independent bookstores. Can't say enough about them. They are the reason why we are here today, and not just like here as far as being like with you online, but just in general. Without bookstores, like, mid-list authors like ourselves, it would be tough for us. So again, we really super appreciate your support of Barbara's Bookshops and other places as well. So on that note, thank you very much from Madison, Wisconsin.
Thanks from San Francisco. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. Wear your masks.
Yes. Okay. Bye.
Bye, Amy.
Bye, Lysley.